Welcome to Pastor's Chat today. We're looking at the 7 churches of Asia that the Apostle John wrote these 7 letters to from the Lord Jesus Christ. They were letters of commendation, but they were also letters of condemnation in many instances. But one of the churches that received only praise was the church of Smyrna. Now, the first church was, of course, the church of Ephesus, and it had left its first love. But the second church is the church of Smyrna, which we believe was the church that represented the age of persecution that the church went through in the 1st to the 3rd centuries. Tremendous persecution by the Roman emperors and authorities. And the last church that has a letter is the church of Laodicea, the Laodicean church. It was the last church. And if these do indeed represent 7 ages and 7 stages of church history, the church of Laodicea being the church of our day, boy, I think what I'm about to say really fits. And this is something that has jumped out at me just recently, and I felt like we ought to take at least a few minutes to talk about it. So the church at Smyrna was the persecuted church. And he says in verse 8, chapter 2, verse 8, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. And here's what he said, I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. I know the blasphemy of those who say they're Jews and are not, but are of the synagogue of Satan." So he says to this church, I know your works, I know your tribulation, and I know your poverty. And then he puts in parentheses, but you are rich. You're rich. And yet it was a poor church. It was a persecuted church. We need to understand in 1st century that most of these churches met in catacombs, or they met in places of a house. They weren't mega churches with big buildings with lots of trappings and money and gold and silver hanging around, big offerings. No, these were poor people meeting in poor places. And the church had obviously looked at by the world was a church that was very poor. It was a church that was under tribulation, under persecution, and it was a church that was poor. So he says, I know your poverty, but you are rich. Now, listen to this. The church of Laodicea, the church of our day, okay, all over the world, churches with magnificent buildings, some of the most magnificent buildings in all the world are church buildings. Right here in America and around the world, almost any place you go in the world, you can find a Christian church that's beautiful, that's fantastic looking, and has a lot of wealth. And that we read to the church of Laodicea, because he says, you say you are rich. I am rich, and have become wealthy, and have need of nothing. But do you not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? So here's a church that was outwardly very rich, and it is the church today in so many cases. And I'm afraid so many of us Christians appear outwardly to be rich. We have money in the bank, we drive nice cars, we live in nice homes, and we have no need to worry about what food we eat from day to day. And I'm serious, we take it for granted. I'm convinced that maybe one of the greatest curses on the church today and upon Christians today is not the problems we have with other people and the problems we have fighting and the disunity, but the biggest problem we have and curse we have is the blessings of God, because now we've taken them for granted and we say, I am rich. And he said, because you say I'm rich, don't you know you're miserable and poor and blind and naked? So the church at Smyrna, the persecuted church, was the church that was rich. Outwardly poor, but he said you're rich. You know what they were rich in? Oh, take time to read the first few chapters of the book of Ephesians. Rich in the glory of God, the riches of the glory of God. Rich in the grace of God. Rich in the mercy of God. Rich in their relationship with God, because They desperately needed him to face what they needed, what they faced every day. And my friend, that's where you want to really be rich. Be careful that you don't say, I am rich and have need of nothing. That's our biggest problem. Tomorrow we're going to talk more about that, about Ephesus, the church that lost its first love, and why it lost its first love, because it goes right with this lesson. Well, God bless you, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Yes, you be rich in Jesus Christ today. God bless.